that it talks about Jesus crying. Jesus' heart being broken. He approached Jerusalem and he saw the city and he wept over it. And he said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. If you, even you, would have known on this day what would bring you peace. I am the Lamb of God. I am riding in Jerusalem on a donkey, the symbol of peace, and you've rejected me. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So we have here again the second time that Jesus wept. And we have here again the reality that some people say his tears are because of the fact of his humanity and that he's looking at the future. Jesus knows that about 35 years later in 70 AD, Rome is going to put embankments up against Jerusalem. Rome is going to destroy Jerusalem, and all that we have left today of the temple is the Wailing Wall. Everything else was destroyed at that time. Jesus knows that this is coming 35, 37 years later. And some people say, well, what his concern about, again, is his humanity and the pain and loss of people losing their life. And I think, yes, that's true, but I think there is a deeper reason and meaning for his pain at this time. And you, even you, had only known, if you had known this day, what would bring you peace. What did he say just 3 weeks prior to Lazarus, to Martha? I am the resurrection and the life. I don't think Jesus is necessarily, and I know that he's pained over what's going to come towards Jerusalem and what's going to happen, but he's more pained for the fact that here the Jewish people, the chosen people, have rejected him. Not all, don't get me wrong, because the first early church was mainly made up of Jewish Christians. But the religious leaders, for the most part, they rejected Jesus and rejected what he had to offer. They rejected what he was bringing to them. They rejected the peace that he was offering in his life. And his heart was broken. And then it leads me to question myself. What breaks my heart? And most of the things that I mentioned before, the things that tend to break my heart, all too often, they're selfish things. The pain I'm going through, the loss I have, the struggles I have within life and marriage and kids and stepkids and all those things. I look at myself and I go to tears and I'm thinking, wait a minute. I was talking with an individual this past week, an older gentleman that I highly respect, and without him even knowing that I was going to be talking about this, he shared with me and he said, well, Pastor, let me tell you about a lady who was next door to me at where I live. And I was asked by some of the other co-workers to go talk to her because she was complaining, she was crying, she was whiny, she was miserable. And he said, well, I went over and I talked to her, and she was complaining, whining, miserable, and it was all the pity party. Poor me. I'm stuck here in this place. I have no friends. I don't have my house anymore. And all of these issues, and this individual that I highly respect as a Christian elder man, he said to me that he said to her, pretty much, what are you whining about? Look at all the gifts that God's given to you. Look at all the grace that God's given to you. You have a wonderful place here. It's not about you, but it's about how we live our life. I thought, man, that is just so awesome. It fit totally into what I was thinking about talking about this morning. See, we tend to too much get into the pity party stuff for ourselves. But what breaks Jesus' heart, that is what's called to break our heart. Some of you maybe read in the bulletin, in the Kalamazoo Gazette this last week on Tuesday. And when I read this, it did lead me to tears. Some letters to Jeannie Phelps, Dear Abby. I guess a couple weeks before there was a question about what to do if the dad was agnostic or not a Christian and the mom was a Christian. What do they do with their kids and what do they talk to their kids about? And all of these letters led me to tears. The one response was, my parents had strong but different Christian faiths. They promised when bringing us up we would go to the church nearest our home. When we were teens, we were allowed to sample other religious traditions and then determine whatever fit us best. I became agnostic, and like Dad in South Carolina, wasn't sure what to tell my son. We introduced stories at bedtime and allowed him to attend his friends' churches whenever he asked. We showed all people are to be valued and differences are to be respected, which I agree with this. But he says that when our son grew up, he is now a caring, gentle person with interest in a lot of cultures, which is great. But the dad says whether he's agnostic, religious, or atheist, it's a personal matter to him. It doesn't matter. You can, wait a minute. That hurt my heart. The next response was, we discussed in advance whether we would talk to our kids about God when the question came up. Our response was, some people believe that there's a God and others don't believe, and you're still going to get a sound religious education, and someday you're going to have to decide for yourself what to do with God. The last letter. My husband and I are agnostic parents of 2 adult children, both of whom are tolerant and open-minded and decent people. Tolerant, open-minded, and decent. All wonderful, and yet the reality is, my heart broke when I read this. We live in a society today that says we should not be teaching our children faith morals. And the reality that there is a God, that Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am. It's not I am one of, not I am one of the ways, but I am the resurrection and the life. You know, when the parents say that, it makes me want to ask the parents, are you going to teach your kids how to drive a car? Or are you just going to give them the car keys and let them go? Are you going to send your kids to preschool and elementary school and middle school and high school to teach them math and English and history and geometry and trigonometry and all those things? Or are you just going to say to your kids, do whatever you want? Whatever educational pursuits you want, you do. We're not going to worry about it. We're going to wash our hands of it. What broke Jesus' heart, I believe, what led him to tears was his knowledge that what he was offering was rejected. Oftentimes in the Old Testament, it's talked about that the Jewish people had a hardness of heart. But then my question is, I think about myself. I think about you. I think about some people that I know that have been brought up within the church and who have walked away. Think about some who are not even within the church. And where is their heart? You see, friends, that hardness of heart will not just hurt us here, but it has an eternal ramification. It's not something we just reject Jesus here and now for our 50, 60s, 80, 90 years of life, but we are rejecting Jesus for eternity. And you see, it's a free gift. It's a free gift, not of works, lest any of us boast. There is nothing we can do to gain our salvation. There is nothing you can do. You look at any other world religion, and we could name them, we could look at them. We've studied them as a church before. Any other world religion has a works-based faith. It's things they have to do. Christ comes on the scene and says, it's not what you do, it's what I have done for you. We're just called to accept it. Palm Sunday is about the praise of God's people. It's about the praise of us, God's people. And yet it's deeper than that. It's about the fact that if we were to look at another passage, it talks about that the people that